Testing, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Does this work? We good? Welcome, everyone. Muted. Jamuted. After all of this time, chat, I can still get jamuted, right? So Dr. K, I think at the end of the day is a tiny bit of a boomer and may always be a tiny bit of a boomer. And so we will see, hold on a second. There we go. So yeah, so I think we're good now. So welcome to another Healthy Gamer GG stream. My name is Alok Kanojia. A reminder that although I'm a psychiatrist, nothing that we discuss on stream is intended to be taken as medical advice, and everything is intended to be for educational and entertainment purposes only. If y'all have a personal mental health, physical health question, please go see a licensed professional. So a couple of updates. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about being in a relationship with someone who has gamer rage. So we're going to share a post actually from a different part of the internet, not from our subreddit, but it's something that we encounter a lot. I know some of y'all may be aware that we actually have a parent support program here at Healthy Gamer, where we try to educate parents about, healthy relationships with gaming, unhealthy relationships with gaming, how to communicate with your child, things like that. So we have a fair amount of experience sort of working with people who have loved ones who have unhealthy relationships with technology and video games. So we're going to share a post about that, and I'm going to share with y'all just my general perspective about like how to approach someone who you are in a relationship with, who you care about, who may have an unhealthy relationship with technology. Other post that we're going to talk about a little bit today is how to live in the present. So this kind of goes back to so we talk a lot about, living in the present and the advantages of living in the present, and how a lot of like regret and anxiety are sort of future and past oriented. But then like, what if you really, really dislike the present, right? So like, what if your present actually sucks? So it's a very, very common problem. I feel like the most common population that I see this in, the thing that kind of pops up in my mind is like university students who sort of don't want to be in college or don't really enjoy their major. So if you're someone who's kind of in this place in your life where like, sure, we can say like, focus on the present, live in the present, enjoy the present. But what if your like present circumstances suck, right? Like then what do you do? So it's a really, really important question, and we're going to touch a little bit on that. Couple of other quick updates. So the HG Discord is doing a community dopamine detox through February. So just a reminder that we have a Discord community that sort of gets together and does everything from meditate to run coding workshops, things like that. I think so a lot of folks on the Discord are trying to develop healthier relationships with technology. So if y'all are interested in cutting back on your YouTube, Reddit, TikTok, etc., join the Discord. The workshops are run by an HG coach every Friday at 11 a.m. Central Time, 5 p.m. GMT. So feel free to join in if y'all want to. Just a reminder, once again, that this is a community-driven event, is not any kind of medical care or things like that. It's just people sort of getting together and trying to work through. One of our coaches is actually super, super passionate about developing healthy relationships with technology. So they're going to be sort of coach-led workshops for people who are looking to make change. So if y'all are interested in that, check it out. It's awesome to be a part of a community that really works to contribute to our AOE healing. And when people kind of chip in and share their own ideas and perspectives and things like that. So thank y'all very much for everyone who's made the Discord sort of a welcoming, positive place. And for those of you that have benefited from being a part of the Discord, we're really, really grateful. And we hope it'll continue to benefit you. So let's kind of kick things off. I'm going to show y'all a couple of posts, and then y'all tell me which ones you want to do, okay? So I was hoping to spend more time on this one. So my husband, my 22F husband, 23M, takes his video game rage out on me, and I don't know what to do. So we were planning on talking a little bit about that one today. I watched Dr. K's video, Why Potential is Paralyzing, and have questions. Dr. K kept talking that focusing on the future and expectations is the problem. The solution is being in the present and trying to enjoy the experience. What if being in the present is an experience I find unpleasant? So how do you deal with that? And then there are a couple of others that we have that we can sort of touch on if we have time. How do you converse with really attractive people? And if I like someone, I get clingy. So why don't we go ahead and I was planning on doing these two today for sure, but why don't we go ahead and see if we can get a poll thrown up. And we'll see what people want to do. Yeah, the post is deleted, which is totally fine, right? So like the person is entitled. I don't think it was banned or anything. It says the post was deleted by the person who originally posted it, which is totally cool. Like, I think it's such a common problem. This is why it's a little unfortunate they deleted the post, but they may have their own motivations, which we want to respect. The good news is, or bad news, depending on how you look at it, is that this is a problem that I've dealt with a lot with people. And I think there's plenty of short stories that I can sort of share that we can still sort of get a really good perspective on this. Okay. All right, so we're gonna probably do it in this order. So we'll start with this post, living in the present. We'll move on to gamer age, and then we'll do I get clingy. Okay. Awesome. So thank you all very much for chiming in and sharing what we want to do. So that's the order of operations. Okay. So let's start with this. Ugh. So I watched Dr. K's video, Why Potential is Paralyzing, and have questions. Dr. K kept talking that focusing on the future and expectations is the problem, and the solution is being in the present and trying to enjoy the experience. But what if being in the present is an experience I find unpleasant? So this is a really, really good question, right? So we talk a lot at HG about, a lot of our problems arise from expectations of the future, or worries arise from expectations, arise from the future. So if you look at some of the yogic texts on the mind, what we sort of discover is that a lot of the unpleasantness and suffering of the mind actually involves the mind being in the future and the mind being in the past. So if we think about regret, right? So the regret sort of leads to sadness. And regret is sort of thinking about things in the past. So when our mind kind of moves to the past, it can enter a state of regret, which leads to sadness. Similarly, if we think about our capacity to worry or be anxious, so that capacity, there's stuff in this on Dr. K's Guide to Anxiety. It goes into a lot of detail about this sort of like Eastern perspective. But if we kind of think about what anxiety is, so our brain has the capacity to predict future danger. This is like a very, very good and healthy and evolutionary thing, right? Like we want to be able to look in the future, plan for the future. The challenge is that a lot of times when our mind gets stuck in the future, all we're doing is worrying. And so the part of the solution to that is to try to train your mind to live in the present. So this is also where a lot of our disappointment comes from expectations. So for example, if I, if I'm planning a party and no one shows up, all of my expectations that people are going to show up and the fact that I feel abandoned and left out and all those kinds of things, like a lot of that causes the suffering, right? So if my expectations for a movie being really entertaining and then showing up to the movie and like expecting a lot sort of results in it not being quite as enjoyable. Generally speaking, if we look at what are some of the most pleasant experiences in our life, they tend to be the ones that are positive and unexpected, right? So if you're walking down the street and you find $100 bill, and like that will be something that, that $100 can feel better than like what you get in your paycheck at the end of the day, right? So our expectations can form a lot of our enjoyment or suffering. So that's totally fine. So if we sort of say that, okay, you should live in the present, and a bunch of people will say like, live in the present, live in the present, live in the present, live in the present, right? But what if the present sucks? Because that's true for a lot of people, right? So this is where, I'm going to, even when I talk about this in Dr. K's Guide, I sort of mentioned that the living in the present thing, even in my opinion, is not a perfect solution because I have not been able to find this to be a 100% effective solution. And I discovered that a few years ago. I had food poisoning and I went to the emergency room. And as I was like on the stretcher, like vomiting into like a bucket in the emergency room, I tried my level best, recruited all of my meditative training, and tried to like appreciate that experience. I tried to be fully in the present and like sit with the nausea and like really try to be like, okay, can I like find some kind of pleasantness in this experience? And try as I might, like, it just sucked. Like, being in the present was just absolutely awful. And I wanted nothing more than to be, like, outside of the present. And so there may be some shortcomings to this present strategy, at least in terms of my experience. I am not by any means enlightened. Maybe an enlightened individual will say, yeah, you can be in the present 100% and it should be, even nausea can be enjoyable. That has not been my experience. Sometimes the present sucks. The unfortunate situation is that there are a lot of people, so I'm going to share with y'all kind of like, who I'm kind of thinking about. So I work with a lot of college students, right? And college students will come to me and they'll say things like, okay, it's fine, you're saying like, don't worry about the future, but I really don't enjoy what I'm studying. I don't enjoy like my life on a day-to-day basis. It's not pleasant. Like, I just don't like it, right? I don't want to study. So my parents have, kind of forced me to be pre-med, and like, I don't want to be pre-med, or I don't want to study CS. I want to be an art major. Or so there are some people who just wind up in situations. They may have a job. They may be in a situation with their family, for example, where like the family is a little bit toxic and they just don't enjoy being at home and they're kind of stuck there, right? And they can't change their circumstances and they just have to put up with the toxicity. They're getting bullied at school. There are all kinds of scenarios where the present is actually unpleasant. And so then the question kind of becomes, okay, like, what do we do about that, right? So what do we do if the present is actually unpleasant? And this is where the good news is I think there's actually a fair amount that we can do, and that ironically, a lot of what we consider to be unpleasant about the present is not actually as bad as we originally think, whereas a lot of it is, right? So let's just start by sort of our question. What if the present is unpleasant? It's a fantastic question, right? So if we say, okay, and the backdrop here is that I'm over here, and if I look to the future, that's where worry lives. If I look to the past, that's where regret lives. And so what Dr. K kind of says is you want to move from worry and regret to the present and kind of like be in the moment. So for those of you that have done things like grounding meditation exercises, that's what they do. So this is where if you look at things like dialectical behavioral therapy, which is an evidence-based treatment for borderline personality disorder, what we sort of find in borderline personality disorder is that these people will sort of feel intense suffering. They'll be afraid of abandonment. They'll feel like terrible people. They have just a lot of these very, very tumultuous and painful emotions. And so DBT is an evidence-based treatment that actually uses grounding meditation exercises that kind of bring those patients to the present, right? So they think that this person may be worried about being abandoned, or they have been abandoned. And so the fear of being abandoned is in the future. So what DBT sort of discovered is that if you kind of like focus on the present and you use a grounding exercise, then like some of that suffering actually reduces. So this is an interesting thing that has now been sort of shown scientifically to be effective. Okay, so let's kind of try to unpack like this experience of the present being unpleasant and what to do about it. Okay, so I'm going to actually start off with a story. Okay, so when I first went to India, what happened is like I didn't really want to go. So I was like failing out of college, and my dad was like, okay, Alok, you have to go to India. And I didn't really know what to expect. So I was like, all right, what the hell? For 2 years, I tried to put my life together. I tried to fix things on my own. I'd read a bunch of self-help books. I'd tried this, I'd tried that. And nothing was really working. So I was like, okay, what do I have to lose? And boy, did I have a lot to lose. Because my first 2 weeks in India were some of the worst. It was honestly some of the worst time of my life entirely. I was incredibly lonely. I went to a part of India where I didn't speak the language. I didn't know anyone. There was like no technology there, right? Because I was staying at a monastery. I remember waking up every morning and being like nauseous. Like I didn't like the food. I felt like vomiting after every meal. I didn't really like know anyone there. I didn't know what I was doing there. I just felt like I didn't really enjoy the experience. I didn't really like doing yoga. I would sit there and try to meditate. And my mind would just wander and worry and all this kind of stuff. And so it was a really, really unpleasant experience. And during that entire time, I still remember like putting on somewhat of a positive face. So, you meet other people at the monastery or ashram and they ask you, how are you doing today? And I'd smile and say, I'm doing great. This is so fantastic. And I remember every single day I would sort of like start to write an email to my parents because they had sort of like one phone in all of the ashrams. So you had to like, sign up to use it at a particular time. And I remember sort of drafting an email and sort of asking my parents like, hey, can I please come home? Can y'all buy me a ticket and let me come home? Because I really hate it here. I hate it here. I hate it here. And I would like write that email out and like I would never send it. And then sometimes I would talk to my parents and they would ask me like, how are things? And then like I wouldn't really let them know how I was feeling. I still don't understand to this day why not. But I didn't say like I didn't break down and cry and like I was crying like every day in my little dorm room kind of thing. And so I just never sort of let them know. But I did sort of say vague things, right? Like it's hard. Like I don't see what the point is. I'm not getting a whole lot of it. I'd say those kinds of things. And so I had a really, really unpleasant experience. And so as I sort of started to like, it's kind of ironic that like, that was the place that I sort of discovered like a couple of important things. So what I sort of discovered is that, oftentimes when we think we're in the present, we're not actually in the present. Okay? We're not truly in the present. And so people may be a little bit surprised by that, but I'll give you all an example. So when I work with students, and we'll kind of jot some of these down in a second, they'll say a lot of different things about school, okay? So we're not truly in the present, okay? So when I talk to students, for example, these are the kinds of things that they'll say. I'll say, okay, like, what do you think about school? And they'll say, like, I don't want to be here. This is number one, okay? They'll also say things like, it's a waste of time. Okay? I'll never use it. Common complaints from students, right? So, and this is a little bit underneath the surface. I know I'm not going to do well. So as I talk to them a little bit more, I ask, okay, how do you feel about studying? Well, I know I'm not going to get a good grade on the test. So it's like, what's the point, right? Like, so what's the point? So this is kind of the mentality that I see time and time and time again with the students. Last thing is I don't enjoy it. Right? And I'll kind of talk to them a little bit about, I don't enjoy it. I don't want to be here. These are the kinds of complaints. And so as we tunnel down, we sort of assume, like, as I talk to these people, they think they're living in the present. But in my experience, living in the present is sort of like swimming in like cold water, where at the very beginning, living in the present feels unpleasant. I mean, living in the present feels kind of unpleasant, right? So like, it's a skill that you actually have to like acquire. Like being able to appreciate the present moment is not something that we are geared to do. And why is that? So appreciating the present moment, the more that society is becoming technology oriented, the more we move away from appreciating the present. Because if we think about what does technology do for us? Technology distracts us from the present. It makes it very enjoyable to like pull our mind into an external thing. So when I'm lost within a movie, like the movie is responsible for my enjoyment. It requires no effort to enjoy the movie, right? In fact, what we tend to gravitate towards time and time and time again is technology that takes away any kind of skills-based enjoyment of the present. So the best movies are the ones that are easy to enjoy. The funnest video games are the ones that are easiest to enjoy. And now that we have a ton of different video games to play, we have a ton of different things to watch, our mind essentially searches. We don't just pick one thing and say, okay, I'm going to appreciate this for what it is. What we do is we hunt and we hunt and we hunt until we find something that is easy to lose ourselves in. And when we do this, our ability to appreciate the present becomes kind of vestigial, right? It kind of atrophies. Since we're relying on these external things to bring us enjoyment, we lose the ability to be able to enjoy the present. So then kind of like, what do we do about this? How do we kind of look into this a little bit deeper? So the more that I kind of look into what these students are experiencing, this is not actually, all of these statements are not in the present. They're actually subtly future-oriented statements. So it's a waste of time. So this is the first one, right? So if we kind of think about this, what does this mean? This means this won't help me in the future, right? I'll never use it. This too is basically the same thing. I know I'm not going to do well. This is actually a future-oriented statement. So as human beings, we have this kind of desire to do well, right? Like we're conditioned to want to do well. And if we sort of know that, okay, there's motivated kids and there's unmotivated kids, and I fall into the unmotivated kid category, therefore it's going to be super, super hard for me to get an A, and it's really easy for them to get an A. And maybe I could get an A, but it's so damn unfair. Why is it easy for them to get an A, and why is it hard for me to get an A? As we get kind of caught up in all this sort of thing, as we get caught up in ego, in comparison, this also shatters our enjoyment of the present, right? What's the point? Well, that's also a future-oriented statement. What's the point? Like, where does this end, right? Why am I doing this? I'm sacrificing the present to gain what in the future? So what's the future gain? So as we see all of these statements, people will say, oh, I don't enjoy being in school. I can't enjoy being in the present. But if you actually tunnel down into what is going on in their mind, none of these are present-oriented statements. They're actually all future-oriented statements or ego-oriented statements. So that leaves these two. I don't want to be here. I don't enjoy it. And so this is where the skill of being in the present comes in. Okay, I don't enjoy it. And when I say that being in the present is kind of like, you know, taking a swim in cold water, it's like when you first do it, it's kind of unpleasant. But as you get used to it, what you actually discover is that it's like more appreciative. There's more to appreciate about swimming in slightly cold water. It's incredibly invigorating and energizing, and you just feel so amazing afterward. But there's absolutely a learning curve involved. I don't want to, or I don't enjoy it. Okay, so there's an element to that, so just be mentally prepared for that. But let's even tunnel down into this. When I talk to people about, you know, let's say you're taking a math class and you don't want to study math because you're a, let's say, biology major. And so even if we kind of think a little bit about what is it exactly that is unpleasant about studying mathematics? And this is where the more that I sort of help people, train people to tunnel down into the moment-to-moment experience, the more the unpleasantness starts to fall away. So if we think about like reading a single sentence and trying to study, forget about studying as the whole, right? Forget about your test. If I'm trying to learn mathematics, if I try to solve just one problem, if I'm sitting there trying to solve 2x minus 3b equals a plus z, okay? What are the possible solutions for a plus z? We don't have enough information to do that, right? Let's say there's this a equals 2z, let's say. So we've got these equations, whatever. I don't even know if this is going to make sense mathematically. But as we look at these two equations, like even if I don't like math, if I just tunnel down and try to solve just this thing for a few moments, it's not actually unpleasant. If I think about reading this and trying to make sense of a single sentence from a history textbook, it's not that unpleasant. And this is sort of what I discovered in India, is that the moment-to-moment activity that I was doing was not unpleasant, right? Like sitting there and like doing Surya Namaskar for like 5 minutes is not unpleasant. Even like if I didn't really know anyone, just kind of sitting outside and like appreciating like the feeling of the sun on my face is not actually that unpleasant. That a lot of what I found unpleasant was sort of what my mind attaches to all of this stuff. I don't want to study math, but like if I were to ask someone, hey, like, you know, how difficult is it? How much do you not enjoy solving like a simple like 2 plus 6x equals 26? Right? How unpleasant is it to do that thing? It's not actually that unpleasant. It's actually kind of fine. And so this is where even in the case of studying, and even in the case of things that we generally speaking don't enjoy, the more that you tunnel down into what is the actual action from moment to moment to moment that you're doing. And the more that you're able to tunnel down into that, the more that you'll discover that actually this isn't that bad, right? Because you can read, like anyone can read one sentence of a history textbook. Right? And then you read one sentence of a history textbook and another sentence of a history textbook and another sentence of a history textbook. You can read 3 sentences of a history textbook and try to understand them. And this is where the more that you sort of practice doing that, the more you begin to realize, like, actually, like, some of this stuff is pretty cool, right? This is an opportunity for me to actually, like, learn something that I probably will never study again. So I'm grateful that I had to take American history and world history and stuff like that because, you know, I didn't get any formal education in history after that. But it's pretty cool when I, like, listen to Dan Carlin's podcast and I kind of know a little bit about what he's talking about, right? And so this is the kind of thing where the more we kind of tunnel down into the moment-to-moment activity of studying, the less unpleasant it becomes. And so this is where a lot of times the reason that things become unpleasant in the present is because, for example, things are hard. So if you don't understand something, so if I'm trying to study, let's say, like, physiology, and I don't understand something, then what happens, that too is not in and of itself, not a unpleasant experience, right? Because people enjoy doing riddles, they enjoy doing puzzles, they enjoy playing games that they've never played before because you don't understand the game yet. But learning to play the game is actually a lot of fun. So not understanding something in and of itself is not pleasant. What tends to be unpleasant about it, or not understanding something, is not unpleasant. What tends to be unpleasant about it is all the crap that we attach to it. Like, for example, I'm stupid. That's an ego statement. Look at those other people who understand it. We start making comparisons. We start predicting into the future. Right? So, like, when you guys so Elden Ring is coming out this month. Woo woo. Super excited. Okay? I'm still not pre-ordering though, chat. But, you know, who here, like, wipes on a boss in Elden Ring or Dark Souls, and maybe this is going to be me, and is like, oh my God, this means I'll never be able to beat the boss. This means that all the other people who beat the boss on the first try are better than me. They're better human beings. I'm not going to like accomplish anything in life. Like, oh my God, no, you just, like, respawn and you get good, right? And so this is the tricky thing, is that when it comes to college, when it comes to what we believe is living in the present, it's all this crap that we attach to it that is actually the source of our suffering, as opposed to actually living in the present. Now, there's one last thing that we're going to talk about, which is not enjoying things. And this is where, unfortunately, you're not going to enjoy everything the same amount. On a forget about living in the present for a second, but, like, if you just take a variety of foods, right? Like, so even let's look at different kinds of nuts. There's, like, almonds and cashews and walnuts and macadamia nuts and things like that. Peanuts, which are legumes, but, you know. And so you can just acknowledge for a moment that you're not going to enjoy all of the nuts the same, right? Like, you're going to like some of them more than others. Like these nuts. Okay. But I see y'all are with me, chat. Okay. But seriously, because I tend to do this exercise. I'm about to teach y'all a meditation, which involves nuts, but not these nuts. Okay. The truth is, you're not going to enjoy all the condiments the same. You're not going to enjoy all the nuts the same. You're not going to enjoy all different kinds of breads the same. And that's okay. Right? So, and this is what's kind of weird, is that, like, we're not going to enjoy everything. So this is where the other thing about being in the present is that even if you don't enjoy it, like, you've got to start thinking a little bit about, do you want your life to be dictated? Do you want your actions to be dictated by what you enjoy? Because in my experience, if you want to be successful, and I recognize we're sort of changing the scope of what we're talking about here, but in my experience, there's one way to be successful in life. The common thing that is shared by just about all of the successful people that I know is that they're pretty good at one thing, at least, right? But this is the main thing, is they're minimally competent at a lot of things, right? This may be their strength. This may be what they're kind of good at, right? Like, you may, main is a particular character, but, like, you're minimally competent at the things that you don't enjoy. So that this is where, like, you can be, like, a fantastic physician, but you still have to be able to, like, be organized enough to do billing and this and, like, answer emails and make sure you send your prescriptions on time and all that kind of good stuff, right? This is what it takes to be successful, is, like, you can be, an awesome, like, you can play video games really, really well, but unless you have the basic, like, ability to work within a team, unless you have the basic ability to like set a schedule for yourself and make sure you play enough, like you're not going to be successful in esports, right? Even if you think about people who are successful streamers, you look at successful streamers and you think, oh, all they do is play video games all day. No, like successful streamers will play a lot of video games, but they're also like really, really good. Like I remember, for example, one streamer told me that they set up 2 internets in their house. And like, that's the kind of thing that's administratively difficult. That way, if one of the internets goes down, they just switch over to the second one and they kind of like keep going. So there's some amount of like administrative competence that is required to be a successful streamer. As you get sponsorship opportunities and media requests and collab opportunities and stuff like that, you have to like be checking your Discord, checking your Twitter, checking your email, things like that. And so this is the kind of thing where like you have to have a minimum level of competence. So if you're someone who's struggling to live in the present, the unfortunate last thing that I have to say is that you're not going to enjoy every single thing in the present. The more that you are able to free yourself from this stuff, the more you're able to free yourself of a comparison, ego, right? The more you're able to free yourself of expectations, all of these things will increase your enjoyment of the present. Absolutely. But I'm not saying that all of those things you can be perfect. I mean, maybe if you consider enlightenment a real thing, right? We don't really even understand if scientifically enlightenment exists. But we certainly know that regular meditation practice tends to make people happier in life, right? So we know that like reducing all of these things will increase your enjoyment of the present. But at the end of the day, there may be some amount of stuff that you find unenjoyable. And even that is you sort of acknowledge that and you work towards that and you say to yourself, okay, this is not my favorite subject to study. I'm not going to enjoy this 100%. I far enjoy studying this other subject more. But in this moment, I'm going to give it my all and I'm going to try to study this thing. And even if I don't enjoy it, at least I have the peace of mind of knowing that like I'm kind of like getting better at being able to tolerate things that I don't enjoy. So as you kind of work through this stuff, you can even sort of start to come to that conclusion, which is sort of the conclusion I came to, which is that at the end of the day, I don't have to like this food, but the food serves a major purpose, right? Like even if it's not what I want to eat, I'm going to need sustenance. And thankfully I have like this food here, which can give me sustenance. And so it's kind of bizarre, but the more that you sort of acknowledge that you don't enjoy something and the more that you sort of embrace it anyway, you can start to actually like move in sort of a positive direction. And so this is kind of the interesting thing is at the end of the day, I think that, you can learn to enjoy the present. And furthermore, you can also practice doing things that you don't enjoy. And this is where people may sort of say, but like, what's the point? Like, where does this end? What's the conclusion? If your mind is saying like, what's the point of like learning things that you don't enjoy? Like, and you kind of get caught up in that, notice what your mind is doing in that moment. It's moving away from the present, right? Oh, okay, like I'm willing to enjoy things. I'm willing to tolerate the unenjoyable if it gives me a benefit in the future. If you tell me this will make me successful in the future, then I'm willing to do it. And already the future-oriented mind has slipped in and shattered your enjoyment practice. And if you're not careful about that, what's going to happen is you will say, okay, I'm making the sacrifice so that I get better in the future. I'm making the sacrifice so I get better in the future. I'm making the sacrifice so I get better in the future. And then when tomorrow comes and the next week comes and 2 weeks come, and then your mind is impatient, it says, where's the better? I'm not better. Everything isn't better. So screw it. Forget doing unenjoyable things. It didn't work. Right? So be careful about how tricky that future-oriented mind is, because it'll slip right in. You can try something for a couple days, then you'll give up because the future expectation has not been met. Does that make sense? So it's really, really tricky. So the last thing that I'll kind of leave you with, and we'll teach more meditation today, is one kind of simple meditation practice, which is to eat something that you mildly dislike. And this is what I want y'all to do. Don't just eat it mindlessly. Like, just eat it. Don't do anything else. Don't watch anything. Don't listen to anything. Don't read anything. Sit and just embrace yourself fully with the experience. And then try to ask yourself, what is unpleasant about this? Right? Where does the unpleasantness come from? And literally every single person, because I've taught this practice to maybe 20 people at this point, and like in terms of a one-on-one situation or group. And every single person that I've talked to that's done this practice has found one really shocking thing, which is that it's not as bad as they thought it was, right? So maybe yours is going to be different. Maybe I just actually screwed up by giving y'all an expectation. So maybe you're going to be the 21st person and it was a bad sample size. But as you do this practice, just kind of notice, like, what is the nature of this unpleasantness? Like, where is it coming from? And so, like, it'll be really interesting because you'll be practicing the skill of being in the present. So at the end of the day, you know, we get this question a lot where, like, okay, it's fine, Dr. K. You say, don't worry about expectations. Let go of your worries and anxieties. Don't linger with regret. Like, live in the present, live in the present, live in the present. But what if the present sucks? Because for a lot of people, the present does suck. And so this is where it's kind of interesting, but even in the present, what a lot of people perceive as the present is not actually the present. It's actually related to ego. It's related to comparison. It's still subtly related to the future. And that we have all of these worries and concerns that we attach to present experiences. And the more that you tunnel down into those and let go of those, hopefully you can start to enjoy things a little bit more. That even studying subjects that you don't like is actually, like, not that bad. Right? Like, sure, you're not a history buff, but learning about Magellan is, like, not the worst thing in the world. Like, you can just learn about Magellan. It's, like, pretty cool, right? And the more that you sort of try to appreciate, like, okay, let's just learn about Magellan. Like, and then for the rest of my life, I'll know some stuff about Magellan. Cool. Let's do it. You can do that. You can put forth some effort. And then as you practice this, you'll sort of start to notice that you start to get better at it, that living in the present is kind of like swimming in cold water, where at the beginning it feels unpleasant. But as you start to do it more and more, you can start to appreciate it more. That's a skill that you can learn. And furthermore, that technology is actually really, really challenging because, like, technology makes that skill atrophy, right? Because technology doesn't require us to appreciate anything. We have so many options that we automatically choose something that requires no effort to enjoy. It requires no effort to get into. So this skill is atrophying in our society more and more and more, which is why we see this problem more and more and more, which is why this is a really important thing. And the last thing that I'll share with you is that at the end of the day, there may be things that you don't enjoy. Right? Despite all of these skills and learning how to swim in cold water and all this good stuff, you may not enjoy it. And that's okay, because you don't enjoy everything in life. And the more that you can even allow yourself to do things that are unenjoyable, the more likely it will help you out in the future. Because life is the kind of, circumstance where you're not going to enjoy 100% of it. And if you let your lack of enjoyment dictate your actions, you will fundamentally not be in control of your life. So it's a really common problem. It's challenging to learn how to sort of deal with it, but it can absolutely be dealt with. It just takes time and energy, practice, and attention. Questions? This is a great question. Why are we scared of being bored? Because we don't know how to manage that anymore, right? We've forgotten how to manage ourselves in boredom. And that's why we're scared of it. So what if you really miss the past? Like, that's very common, right? Missing the past is really, really easy, but that's okay. It's okay to miss the past. The problem is that if you get stuck, because the past is never going to come back. And in fact, recreating the past is only going to lead to present suffering. Because you just can't, it's just impossible, right? So let's say, like, you had a wonderful romantic relationship. That romantic relationship ends, and then you're looking for someone to fill that person's shoes. As you're looking for someone to fill that person's shoes, like, no one is going to fill their shoes perfectly. So all you are setting yourself up for is an expectation that will never be met and will lead to suffering. Not only that, you will lose appreciation for the person who comes next, right? Because you're holding them up to a standard that, like, they're never going to meet. And instead of appreciating that person for who they are, you're trying to, like, turn them into the past. So if you miss the past, which is normal, right? It's okay. Then I think, like, grieving it, letting it go, accepting that it's gone, and recognizing that tomorrow is another day, today is another day, and that there's an opportunity for enjoyment and pleasure and satisfaction and growth today. You can absolutely do that. Can I multitask in the present? No. I don't think it is technically possible to multitask. Generally speaking, the mind can only focus on one thing at a time. So multitasking is not, you're not technically multitasking, you're just rotating tasks very quickly. Will this help deal with my insecurities? I hope so. But this is where if you're targeting insecurities, let me think about how to... So if we're talking about fixing insecurities, the way this will help with your insecurities is that you will spend less time with them. The process of metabolizing an insecurity is different from this. All we're doing here is training our mind to spend less time with the unpleasantness. That it'll absolutely do. But as we kind of talked about, this is where, if we kind of look at, these issues of like ego and comparison, that's where your insecurities are. So your insecurities will manifest in this way, but like by spending time away from our comparison and ego and stuff like that. Like, so for example, if you're doing Surya Namaskar, which is a set of yoga postures out on your balcony in the sunshine, like it's just hard to be insecure if you're just absorbed in that practice. Right? If you're like taking a nice shower, it's just hard to be like absorbed in your insecurities in that moment. If you're eating, let's say, a nice bowl of butternut squash soup and your attention is absorbed there, like your insecurities just won't be present in your mind in that moment. So it'll be helpful in the sense that it'll give your mind time away from that. And generally speaking, the more that we feed our insecurities, the worse they get. The more time we spend away from them, generally speaking, the better they get. But it's not going to target and fix a particular insecurity. It's not going to metabolize that emotion, if that makes sense. How do I deal with expectations of the present? There's no such thing as expectations of the present. Expectation by nature of its thing is a future-oriented thing, right? It's tricky. But there's no expectation of the present. The present is what is. An expectation is what you think will be. So how do I deal with comparing myself to others? So that involves the ego, right? So this is where, so I would say that's a complicated question. We've answered it in detail, so I'm not going to go into all of it here, but I'll direct you to some resources. The first is, I'm sure we have YouTube videos and stuff about that. I think we have resources on our wiki about that. And then there's this segment of Dr. K's Guide to Meditation called the Atmanpada, which is the path of self, which goes into a lot of detail about the nature of self and ego. There's a wiki, yes. Right? So we have we have a wiki. Check it out. How can you relate this to Raging in League? Y'all ready to talk about Raging in League? Let's move on. Okay. So hopefully that's helpful. It's tricky. It's not the simplest thing, but work at it. Y'all will get there. Is it healthy to control every reaction to the present? I don't know exactly what that question means, but your initial response to things is not usually something you can control unless you're talking about a behavior. So generally speaking, I think the right move is to let your reaction happen, but then let it wash through you and then sort of behave in a non-reactive manner. And if you mean reaction as a behavior, then yeah, you don't want to do that. But like, for example, if I drink this water and it doesn't taste perfect, I want to just acknowledge that, let that pass through me and just appreciate, okay, at least like, my mouth is less dry now, so I can be grateful for that. That was pretty good. So yeah. Okay. Dr. K, why do I never have questions about anything? Because you are brilliant, and you are one of the the most, all knowledge is already yours, right? Okay. All right, let's move on to the next one. Okay. Okay, so let's look at this. All right. So now we're going to talk a little bit about being in relationships with people who seem to have unhealthy video game habits, okay? So my 22F husband, 23M, takes his video game rage out on me, and I don't know what to do. Since the pandemic has started, pretty much the only thing we have been able to do in our time off is play video games. My husband plays a first-person shooter game, and I sometimes play with him. What is really bothering me is that when he plays these games and doesn't do well, he gets angry. He yells profanities and slams on his desk or chair arm so much that he broke it. After one of these episodes, even if I'm not involved, he will refuse to talk to me and go to bed without looking at or speaking to me. I feel really hurt by this and have gone to bed crying multiple times because of it. Every time it happens, I try talking to him about it, and I always express how it's making me feel, but nothing has changed. I always ask if there's anything I can do to help, but he won't talk to me. I don't think it's fair that he takes his anger out on me. I've tried to say that it's just a game and that he should try to have fun, but he doesn't have fun unless he does well in the game. I'm sure he feels upset too because there's not much else we can do for fun besides play video games. Maybe he needs a new hobby. What do I do when he refuses to communicate during these episodes? I've talked to him about this after he calmed down, but it keeps happening. Advice? After seeing everyone's replies, I want to add a little bit more context. My husband is definitely emotionally underdeveloped. His parents aren't the most emotionally involved people, even with their children. Now my husband's frustration goes past video games. If he has had other hobbies, he tries really hard to learn everything he can about it, but will get frustrated and upset when he fails or does something wrong. He gets angry because he is failing. It's the same with video games. He's mad at himself, but it's pouring over into other things into his life. No, I'm not going to leave my husband for this. We are in our 20s and he clearly needs help or he'll never change. And I want to help him get that help. Thank you to everyone that suggested therapy or counseling. I'm going to talk to him about all of this today after work. So, this is unfortunately an increasingly common situation that people find themselves in. We have romantic relationships, parental relationships, sometimes sibling relationships, where one member plays video games, I guess a lot, or it's unclear whether the person plays excessively in terms of hours, but that the video game seems to make them very, very upset and it negatively impacts their relationships. And that absolutely sucks. And we're seeing this kind of happen all over the place, right? Because what's going on is that as games become more engrossing, as they become more addictive, as we have some of these global experiences like the pandemic, the only option that we have is to turn more and more to video games or, technology or things like that, because our normal, socialization, our normal ways of spending time together, as all of those things get restricted, we have no choice but to turn more to the video game. And so these problems are becoming more and more common. So the first thing that I want to say is that if you're in this situation, it's not your fault. You're not doing a bad job as a sibling, as a parent, as a significant other. And also that I really respect that, the knee-jerk reaction that a lot of people have on the internet is to tell this person to leave this man-child, right? Like the knee-jerk reaction is saying things like, don't get married, or it was a mistake to marry him in the first place, or, it's a mistake to be in the relationship. And I think those kinds of judgments are really, really easy to toss around on the internet, right? Like it's really easy to look at this person and say, why are you with this? Why are you with this idiot? You don't deserve this. You deserve better. And I think that's actually a little bit, it may come across as compassionate, but it's not really. I actually find it to be quite judgmental. Because what we're not doing here is meeting this person where they're at. What are this person's goals? If we truly want to be compassionate and empathetic, what we should do is like acknowledge what this person wants, right? And try to support them in terms of their own goals. It's not to try to convince them that their goals are wrong, right? That you're an idiot for staying with this man-child, like you should leave him right away. And so, because it's really easy on the internet to look at the situation and to say these kinds of things. But presumably this person got married because they were in love, because they care deeply about this person. And I do believe that, like, generally speaking, you should work on things that are broken instead of piecing out. Because if you just, kind of piece out after giving it, like, without giving it sort of a fair amount of effort and kind of like, attempting to really fix it, I don't think you're doing yourself a favor, because the truth is that it sounds like this person believes that their husband is suffering on some level as well. It also feels like, this person acknowledges that their husband is not the most like emotionally aware person, which we're kind of seeing more and more as well. And that this person wants to help their husband. And I really hope that they're successful, right? I really hope that they can do that. So today, what I'd like to share with y'all is my general approach and some general advice about how to deal with someone who you love, who you don't want to abandon, who you don't want to give up on, right? Those are sort of the basic ideas, because there's tons of advice for people who want to give up on their relationship or like leave their partners, right? There's tons of people like GTFO. There's 1,000 people to say that. But in my overwhelming experience, like giving up on your loved ones is like emotionally difficult. It's easy to say on the internet, hey, just peace out. You deserve better. But then like, what are you signing up for? Like online dating? Are you signing up for trying to meet people during the pandemic? Like, it's not easy, right? So what I'm going to try to do today is share my perspective on if you do want to work on a relationship, how you should do that, and especially with someone who has a problematic relationship with video gaming, how to address those. Okay? So let's talk about that. So the first thing that I kind of want to acknowledge, so this is like, gamer rage and relationships. So if you're someone who doesn't want to give up, and I'm not saying that, you can make the relationship work, and that there may not be a time, that there may be a time where, you really should leave the relationship. We'll talk about that a little bit at the end. So this is kind of the premise, that you don't want to give up. So what I'd like to do for those people today is try to equip you to understand a little bit about how to position yourself best and communicate with these people in a way that hopefully is productive. Okay? So the first thing is we're going to talk about things like pitfalls. So there are common mistakes that I see people make, which this person isn't necessarily making, but I'd like to outline those because I tend to find that these are common pitfalls that people fall into. The first is don't deliver feedback in the moment of crisis. Okay? So this is the most common thing that people do. So like when someone breaks the armchair is when people really like have the conversation. So I see this a lot in our parent program too, which is like conversations around video games become like conversations around punishments. Like the two become one and the same. And there's like, it makes sense that people want to have the conversation at that moment, right? Because that's when things are like at their most severe. But if we think about someone who just broke an armchair, you may want to say something at that point, and you have every right to say something at that point. But let's think a little bit about how effective what you say is. So how open to listening and how open-minded is that person in that moment? So the first thing is, I'm not saying you can't say something in that moment. It's probably a good idea to try it. But in general, so if we think a little bit about, being a therapist, for example, we tend to talk about things outside of the individual moment, right? So if someone like comes to my office and they're talking about a conflict at work or a conflict in their relationship, like they had an argument with their spouse like 2 days ago, by definition, we are not talking about it when emotions are high, right? Like that's part of the advantage. And part of the advantage of the therapeutic model is that we have conversations about stuff when people are level-headed. So the first pitfall that people tend to fall into is that they try to give feedback, or the majority of feedback, when there's an actual crisis going on. Okay? So that's problem number one. The second thing is don't jump to solutions. So this is the other thing that tends to happen. So is the second that the armchair breaks, someone will say, hey, you have to uninstall that shit right now. Like, this needs to go. Like, this is a huge problem. You need to do this. You need to do this. You need to do this. And you may be right? So like you may be more objective in that moment. You may like recognize, see things in a way that your partner doesn't. And so you want them to do particular things. I've seen this a ton in terms of, so I used to work at, residential addiction treatment facilities, and like 30%, or was it 30%, 50% of people were like going through a separation or divorce. I forget the exact statistic, right? And this is a kind of situation where they've got like a bad drinking problem. They've had a bad drinking problem for years. And so it's reached the point where the spouse is like, you take care of this, or like, we're getting divorced. There's talks about divorce. And so the spouse will come in and will like be like hard charging, and I don't blame them, right? Because they've been hurt a lot by this. They feel betrayed. They feel led on. There's talk about change, and nothing ever happens. So the spouse comes in and like has a list of things that need to happen. And you can even in moments where you browbeat someone, because in this moment of crisis, maybe the person feels guilty. So you can even get them to promise to never do it again. But these are not effective behavioral change solutions, right? Because people promise all the time. And we even see this in this post where the person kind of says, I'm sure he feels upset too. I don't think it's fair. But there's somewhere in here where they say that, like, we talk about it afterward, but it doesn't seem to change. Like, nothing's changing, or nothing's getting fixed. Okay? So the second thing is don't jump to solutions. Like, we're not really there yet, because you can provide them with solutions. They may listen, they may not listen. But generally speaking, people are not mentally prepared to engage in solutions. So the third thing is be careful about your positioning. So this is like really, really interesting. So one concrete piece of advice is that oftentimes when you guys have talks in relationships, you're sitting across from each other. Don't do that. Sit next to each other. Go for a walk. Hold hands. You want to be side by side. It's really fascinating. The one thing that I have found that is just so fascinating is when you're sitting across from someone, it engages in an adversarial dynamic, right? Especially if there's a table between you. And so I know it sounds kind of weird, but like even I've noticed this like with my own relationships, is that when I have conversations sitting across from someone, it's very different from when I'm sitting next to someone. It's like bizarre. Like it's some weird, I don't know, like if there's data behind this or what. It's something that I was taught in residency, right? So like my psychotherapy supervisors and stuff like explain this stuff to me, like, and it's absolutely true. Even in terms of the way that I set up my office, I almost never sit directly across from a patient. So like in my office, I have my furniture sort of set up like a U, and I kind of sit at like a 45-degree angle. So we're kind of like both like looking in the same direction. And we'll kind of like glance over at each other, but I don't know why it works. It just seems to really work. It's something that a lot of psychotherapists do, and it's something that you can do. I mean, it's not like a therapy technique, right? It just helps you kind of get on the same side. Okay, so these are the three things. Don't be adversarial in your positioning. Don't have conversations during a crisis, and don't jump to solutions. And so then the question is, okay, like, what do you actually do? What should I do instead, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about this. But before we do this, let's try to understand the experience of the other person. So oftentimes people who wind up in this problem are, as this person put it, emotionally underdeveloped. Right? So we see this a lot. So here on stream, we refer to this as alexithymia, which is the inability to recognize your own emotions. So you're kind of colorblind to emotions. So it's my belief that, risk factors for alexithymia include male gender, include technology usage, include kind of familial conditioning, right? A certain kind of familial conditioning. So if we look at it societally, this is thankfully changing now, but like it used to be when I was growing up, there was really only one emotion that men were allowed to express, which is anger. And any kind of guilt, shame, or fear was like not discussed, not talked about, and in fact got transmuted into anger, right? So like if I am attracted to someone and I ask them out on a date and they say no, instead of acknowledging that I feel rejected and I'm afraid that I'll be alone forever, what I do is get pissed at the person. And you can still see this on the internet today, where like the primary response to being rejected is getting angry at them, right? So this is like all of these kinds of feelings just get transmuted to anger. So this is common. So the first thing is like, and so if this is the case, you know, we're going to have to help this person maybe like understand their emotions and stuff a little bit better. So the person sort of mentioned counseling or therapy, which I think is a fantastic idea. Right? So like that's absolutely one solution. But even then, if you go straight to a solution and you say, you need to see a therapist, otherwise we're done. The person may comply, but they're not complying out of like, you know, they're complying out of fear, right? You're like kind of forcing them into it. And this is my key experience working with people with addictions, is that like the best strategy to help someone overcome some kind of addictive or unhealthy behavior is not to use fear to like force them into things, but is to try to engage them as an ally. Because once your husband wants to change their behavior, once they realize that they need to change their behavior, once they are actively trying to change their behavior, it'll be so much easier, right? It's so much easier than trying to force someone to do something. So how do we do that? The first is we're going to try to understand. Okay? So this is where like I would recommend just having a non-judgmental conversation about this kind of stuff. So you can ask questions like, what do you think about your gaming? Right? And this is where you have to be super, super careful if you're trying to have this conversation. So a lot of times what people will do is they'll like use Dr. K's words, but in their mind, they're just waiting for an opportunity to like share their own frustration. They're not actually trying to understand. They may start with this, and then they'll start asking questions like, don't you think it's a problem? Or if the person says, oh yeah, it's no big deal. Oh, so breaking a chair is no big deal? This is going to fail. If in your mind, you are not trying to understand, but you're just pretending to ask this question to understand, this will result in, very good, chat, passive aggressive. It'll torpedo in the face. So you yourself need to try to understand. As long as the judgment in your mind is made up, you're like screwed. Like it's not going to work. Okay? So like be aware of this. So you need to try to understand like what does this person genuinely think about the situation? Do they think it's good? Do they think it's not good? Do they think they're going to get over it? Do they think I'm okay with it? Like what do they think about the situation? So pretend for a moment that you would have to represent this person's view to a third party. And any kind of question that the third party would ask you, you should be able to answer about what they believe and what they think. That's the approach you should take. Okay? What if they don't know themselves? We'll get to that in a second, because chances are they don't. So, as you start to ask questions that are open-ended questions, by the way, right? Not yes or no questions, not directional questions, so not this stuff, but what do you think about your gaming? Y'all will start to engage in discussion because they may not understand this stuff, but as long as you don't attack them with these kinds of questions, they'll start to open up and then y'all can explore together. And then they will automatically, it's kind of bizarre, but it's like some weird verbal jujitsu. But as you sort of form non-judgmental relationships with people, they will start to like explore their feelings because they feel safe, right? Whereas like, let's think a little bit about what this person's experience is. Like they can tell like, so presumably they're married, so they hear their wife, who presumably they love, crying themselves to sleep. How do you think this person feels, right? They feel hurt. They feel powerless. They feel guilty, like, oh my God, I'm such an asshole. But I don't know how to fix it. I don't know what to say. I don't know how to say. I don't know what I'm feeling. They feel paralyzed, right? They can tell that they're being an asshole, but like, how do they manage feelings of being an asshole? What were they taught? Do you talk to your partner about being an asshole? Do you apologize? Like, how were they conditioned? Okay? And the worse they feel about themselves, remember, what do? We transmute that into anger. And then how do we cope? We play video games. And then break chair, feel guilty. It's happening again. And then we go back to my wife is crying herself to sleep. Rinse and repeat. Y'all see that? Right? And at each cycle, all this stuff gets worse. And each cycle, this increases. And each cycle, this increases. Because they don't know how to manage their emotions. Right? So the first thing is you just want to have a conversation about it, or multiple conversations away from the crisis. Okay? So the next thing that you want to do is kind of check in with them about having conversations. So when you have a conversation, you can ask at the end of the conversation, hey, so we talked a little bit about like gaming and stuff. I'm wondering, and this is where, especially if they're alexithymic or they're emotionally underdeveloped, you may have to put specific phrases for them to deny. So you can start by asking, what did you think of this conversation? But then you can even ask them, like, did you feel like I was attacking you? Did this conversation make you feel guilty? Did this conversation make you feel angry? Did this conversation make you feel like I don't understand? Did this conversation make you feel ashamed? Right? You can start to ask like these explicit questions and they'll be like, oh yeah, maybe I did feel angry. I did feel ashamed, you know? And just listen and then like kind of check in with them and be like, then ask for permission. Are you okay if we talk about this again, like maybe a week from now? Are you worried that like, I'm going to like this, like, do you feel like I'm leading you into a trap? I'm really not. I'm just trying to understand like what, you know, what's going on here. And this is where, as you do that for a little while, you can sort of authentically, like you can absolutely be authentic and you can say, you know, if this is your partner, I would just say it in a non-passive aggressive way. You can sort of lay your boundary. And then kind of ask an open-ended question. So you can say like, it really hurts my feelings when like I'm crying and you won't like talk to me. And then you can kind of, and this is the key thing, now what you want to do is recruit them in problem solving. Right? You can state how you feel, absolutely. You can state your feelings, recruit them for problem solving. Instead of saying, you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do this. Ask them, so the next time that I'm feeling this way, what should I do? And what can you do? Like, what do you think about this? Because generally speaking, if this kind of behavior is going on, I would bet 95% chance that the person, the husband in this scenario, like recognizes that there's a problem. Right? And so what you want to do is recruit their help, not order them to do things or make them feel guilty. Now, some of this stuff may create feelings of guilt, which is fine. Like, that's okay. Right? Like, it's okay to like evoke some amount of guilt, but you don't want to use these kinds of passive aggressive things. Like, if you need to cry, you need to cry. Like, that's okay. Like, you feel, you know, express your emotions the way that you need to. But at some point you want to recruit them from problem solving and like come to them and say, remember, this is like, so a week ago I had a really rough day. Like I felt really alone. I felt like, you know, I wanted to spend time with you, but you wouldn't talk to me. I felt super hurt. What are we going to do about that? Is this the kind of thing where like I should go see a therapist, or like, is this the kind of thing where can I like rely on you for emotional support? Or is this the kind of thing where like you just don't have the bandwidth to give it in that moment? Like, help me understand, like, what are we going to do about this? Because this is a problem for me. And I recognize, because now the key thing is that if you understand stuff about them, then you can include that in there, right? And that's what makes it non-judgmental. So you can say like, I totally get that, like, you feel alone, you feel frustrated. This is the way that you connect with your friends, and that your friendships are important to you. So I'm not saying stop playing video games entirely. What I'm saying is like, how do we like fulfill that need that you have to play games online or connect with your friends? And at the same time, like, make it so that I'm not crying myself to sleep. Like, how do we fix this? And generally speaking, when you recruit them for problem solving, they will make suggestions. And now the whole ball game has completely changed. Because instead of telling them, hey, you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do this, they are becoming active participants in solving the problem, right? Number 4 says recruit them for problem solving. Like now the whole ball game has changed because they're actually going to like make an effort and it's coming from them. Now, this is where you may have to start to, you know, set boundaries and stuff and like hold them to a particular standard. Absolutely. But I would say like these 4 steps are the foundation of how to approach someone who has like a problem with gaming, right? You want to try to understand their perspective first. You want to talk to them about talking to them. Like, what is the nature of our conversation, right? And this is where you can also do something that's kind of like a more advanced technique called going meta. This is something we train our coaches in, which is you can talk to your husband a little bit about like, what is the way in which we solve problems in this relationship? So if you have an issue with me, like, how do we fix that issue? If I have an issue with you, how do we fix that issue? And you want to be plain. He knows what you're talking about. You know what you're talking about. So you can say like, you know, I have some concerns about your gaming, but before I wanted to jump to a judgment, I was just thinking like, let's take a step back and figure out how do we as a husband and wife communicate problems in our relationship. I'd like to understand and establish that. Right. And I also would love it, like, because like we've established that, like, you may have issues with me and I'd love to hear about them because I have a concern about your gaming. Absolutely. But it occurred to me that it was actually kind of unfair and premature for me to just judge you with that issue right away. And instead, like, how do we solve problems? And then once you develop a frame, right, is it go to therapy or is it talk things out between us? Is it go on a walk once a week where we like sort of like sit down and run through like ups and downs of our relationship? Like, what's the nature? Like, how do we solve problems? Like, what's the right way to approach this? Right? It's like if you go to your doctor and like you've got a lump, you're like, okay, doc, like, what do we do about the lump? And then like your doctor will say, okay, we do this, this, this. I mean, this is a little bit different because y'all are both, you know, on the same level here. But you're having a meta-level conversation, and usually meta-level conversations are less emotionally charged and will be like engage less defensive behavior. Because you're not talking about the problem, you're talking about how to talk about problems, which is very healthy in a relationship to begin with. Right? And as you kind of have this meta-level conversation, okay, so like a once a week conversation sounds okay with you. Why don't we talk next week and, you know, you can kick things off. So if there's anything that I'm doing that is really concerning you, you can let me know. And so this is where, you know, once you start recruiting them from problem solving, then you can offer solutions. So you can say, what do you think about therapy or counseling? Because the other kind of ironic thing is that when people feel, you know, guilty, they oftentimes do not want to do therapy or counseling. It actually, like, they feel worse. They're like, oh, I should be able to handle this on my own. I'm such an idiot because my wife is crying herself to sleep every night and I can't fix it on my own. Right? So this is another thing that men tend to be taught, which is like self-reliance. Also true in Asian American culture, by the way. One of the reasons that it's an interesting study I was looking at recently, that despite the fact of equal amounts of suffering from mental illness, people of Asian American descent are much less likely to seek treatment. And the main reason is because they believe in self-reliance. So they're more likely to read self-help books and less likely to seek treatment externally because they think they should be able to solve it on their own. Right? So if you're someone who's struggling to have a conversation and work on unhealthy technology usage with someone close to you, and you, number one, don't want to give up on them, don't want to break up, first thing to understand is there are a couple of common pitfalls. Don't deliver feedback at the time of crisis. Let people calm down. Let people be a little bit more open-minded. Let them not be emotional. Second thing is don't jump straight to solutions because you may not understand the problem and they may have solutions of their own. Once you start forcing people into solutions, they'll get defensive or they'll feel bullied into engaging in the solution. And this will result in things like promises that are then broken, right? Because it's not the motivation is not intrinsic. It's not coming from them. The motivation is coming from a fear of what you're going to do unless they say yes. And then they're not really working for you. They're just like, they're obedient as opposed to motivated or inspired. Third thing is there are some positioning tips, right? So like go for a walk, sit next to them, hold hands, things like that. I mean, this also depends on the nature of your relationship. Okay. In terms of what to do, start by understanding. This isn't just ask some question and then be passive aggressive depending on their answer. So some people will sort of ask an open-ended question and just wait to attack. They'll use an open-ended question as an ambush. So the standard that I would recommend for open-ended questions is, imagine you would have a conversation with a third party for 1 hour. And any question that third party would ask you about the gaming behavior, you should be able to answer. Why do you play games? You should be able to answer that. How do you feel when you break a chair? You should be able to answer that. What makes you want to play games? What makes it hard for you to play games? Do you want to cut back? All those kinds of things, right? How long have you been playing games? So it's really genuinely try to understand their perspective. Check in with them. So as you have conversations, check in with them. Be like, hey, how was this conversation with you? Did I step out of line? Was it okay? Can we do it again? Lay your boundaries. You can be authentic, right? So you don't want to start here. You actually want to start with the other two. But once you understand their perspective, you want to share yours. And hopefully they'll start picking up and start asking you questions too. And then next thing is recognize that y'all are on the same team. So it's not necessarily your responsibility to come up with solutions. In fact, it's not exclusively your responsibility. This person should be taking responsibility too. So ask them, hey, what do you think we can do about this problem? Right? Once you've listened to them and you've made it clear that you want to understand them and you approach them non-judgmentally and you've stated your problems, you can ask them, hey, what do you think we should do about this? Another key thing, this is not one conversation. This is like at a minimum 3 conversations. Okay? Spaced out by at least 48 to 72 hours. So you don't want to get to the problem solving in session 1. You want to wait until convo number 3. And then if you need to, you can have a meta level discussion about how we solve problems. Like in this relationship, what is our approach? How are we going to make this work? So the people in this example are pretty young. They're 22 and 23. So these are very important conversations to have. Instead of breaking up with them, just start to figure out, okay, we're going to be together presumably, or we want to be together for 50 years. How are we going to manage conflict between the two of us? And hopefully as you sort of engage in this stuff, and we've seen this a lot in our parent program, I've seen it a lot in my own relationships, advice with friends, things like that, that when you start really working towards a common goal, when you try to understand someone instead of just blame them, when you acknowledge their experience as well, that's when you start to really recruit them, they become motivated, and things start to move in the right direction. Questions? Okay? Will I be able to use this for my brother who is addicted to should have, could have, would have, woodland? So there's a good video in Dr. K's guide called The Fantasy Trap. There may be stuff, once again, in our wiki and stuff like that, that I just don't know off the top of my head because we just have so many. The reason that we kind of talk about Dr. K's guide is because it's kind of concise and I know exactly what's in it. Whereas on our YouTube, we have hundreds of videos. So you may be able to find something. I'd check out the wiki too. But I'd highly recommend the Fantasy Trap video. So that's the video about shoulda, coulda, woulda, right? A case of the shoulda, coulda, wouldas. And that's when we get stuck in fantasy. But can this help? Absolutely. This is like communication skills, right? So you could talk to them, hey, let me just think a little bit about, so if you've got someone who's stuck in the shoulda, coulda, wouldas, I think it's a little bit trickier. Let me just think about what I would say. So I would start actually not by asking questions, but by making statements, right? So I would start by sort of saying, it sounds like, you've made some mistakes and really missed the boat in a couple of ways. What's it like to have missed the boat? Right? So I'd ask them questions about this concept of missing the boat. And how has it affected you to miss the boat? And then eventually you want to get to questions like, I wonder if, and you can make this observation, right? I wonder if it seems like you're so occupied about missing the boat now. I mean, you're so occupied about missing the boat in the past. I wonder if there are boats that are sailing past you right now that you're not even aware of because you're so preoccupied in the past. What do you think? Right? Do you think that the way that you kind of have a case of the shoulda, coulda, wouldas actually gets worse over time. And you can even ask questions like, do you feel like things have gotten worse over time? Like, how has missing the boat affected you? It's kind of interesting, right? I sometimes wonder if we get so caught up in the past that we lose opportunities, we miss the opportunities in the present. You can sort of share some of those concepts with them in sort of a non-judgmental way eventually. That's where you want to go. So when I made the video on Fantasy Trap, it was kind of based on my experience with these people. And eventually what you want to help them understand is, first of all, the shoulda, coulda, wouldas don't help you, right? Like, it doesn't help you to think that way. There's some amount of learning to be had. But eventually, at some point, you're not learning from it anymore. You're just occupied with it and losing opportunities now. So we see this a lot with people who feel like they've missed relationship or sexual milestones, where they think like, oh, I'm 21 years old and I haven't gotten laid, therefore I'm behind. Oh my God, I should have dated more in high school. And the more that they think in that mentality, as they react and interact with other people, they think oh, this person is so much more experienced, they'll never want to be in a relationship with me. But that thinking then makes it so they get through college without catching up, right? And now what's happened is they missed the boat in high school and they missed the boat in college. So now they're 24 and they've never been in a relationship. And then that mentality keeps them from getting into a relationship. And then they're 27 and they haven't been in a relationship. So at some point you have to escape that kind of fantasy trap. And it starts by actually it doesn't start, but the key thing to cause that to sort of fall apart is to recognize at some point that no amount of past milestones actually prevent you from doing anything today, right? You can be 45 years old and apply to college. You can still go to college at the age of 45. You can lose your virginity at the age of 45. You can go to the gym for the first time at 45. You can learn how to bake bread at 45. The action is actually technically the exact same. People may look at you a little bit funny. There may be some amount of judgment, but it's not, you can be a 45-year-old in college and some people may look at you weird, but that doesn't mean that you can't go to college, right? So not hypothetically, in actuality, you can do all of those things. It's not a hypothetical. You can do it, right? You can do anything. I don't know if you can become an Olympic athlete at the age of 70. But most things in life you can do far later than most people when most people do them, right? You can do that. Yeah. My experience in medical school was that, I was I was 4 years older than most of the people. Right? I was starting med school when I started med school, I was as old as people would normally be when they finished it. But it was fine. It's I'm just older. That's just, I'm living life at my pace, right? I did a couple of side quests that had low yield rewards. So I haven't gotten around to main questing in a while. Right? It's okay. This is the thing in life, you can only move at your own pace. You can't move at someone else's pace. It's kind of a weird thing to say, but I don't think we really appreciate that enough. Smurfing. No, it's, if anything. So when you get accepted to medical school with a 2.5 GPA, you're not smurfing. If anything, you're account buying. With a bunch of kids at 4.0. And then when I started residency at Mass General, then it was account buying at the really next level, right? Because at least in medical school, there were some people who had 3.3s. But then you wind up at MGH and Harvard Medical School. It's everyone's got a 4.0. It's GG. All right, questions. Okay, so I see we've got a quick question about, is your mind empty when being in the present? Generally speaking, it's emptier. So being absorbed in the present or a flow state oftentimes has something like an empty mind. Oftentimes. But in that too, there's oh man, I think there's a video about this on YouTube about states of consciousness. Or maybe it's in Dr. K's guide, I forget. Maybe it's in Dr. K's guide. but we actually go through like the states of consciousness and the activity of the mind. So like, for example, in pure meditation, so there's Sanskrit correlated with this, right? So we've got normal mental activity, and then we've got like pratyahara, which is like the withdrawal of senses, dharana, which is focusing your mind on one thing. Then we kind of get into the flow state where you have activity of mind, but it's like kind of one pointed and like functioning at a very high level, but it's still active. And then beyond the flow state is dhyan, which is absorption of mind with the object. And then like you get into samadhi, which is like the annihilation of mind. So it's I don't think we have good language in English that precisely describes it. We talk about mind as if it's binary, but it's not binary, right? There are all these different states of mind. There's dreaming, there's deep sleep, there's wakefulness, there's daydreaming. So we subjectively describe these, and we understand that there are all these different states of mind. So if y'all want to, I think that's maybe in both. Because one of the complaints about Dr. K's guide is that people who have been watching our stream for 2 or 3 years will say like, oh, there's nothing new in here. I mean, there's some stuff, or like most of it's, I've heard before. The goal of the guide is not to replace 3 years of stream. It's to actually that is the goal. Now that I think about it, it's if you haven't been watching stream for a while and you want to catch up on this in a comprehensive and kind of concise way, that's what the guide is there for. We would love a video going through different states of mind. We've done one. At least one. Oh, so this is a great question. So relating to, at what point is it time to end the relationship? Thank you so much, Lucidal Cake, for asking me. So this goes back to the person who's in the relationship with an unhealthy gaming relationship. So this is where like I give the person a decent chance, right? Like you do this stuff for a while. You try to engage them in conversation. You try to have, recruit them to help you problem solve. And at some point, like they need to start doing that stuff, right? So I'd say like, give it 6 months, give it a year, maybe even give it 2 if you're married to this person. Like give them a hefty amount of time and patience and like working at things, because you're not going to figure everything out right away. The first solution they come up with may turn out to be really, really hard for them, right? So like work at it for a while. But I'd say the biggest reason to leave a relationship is if someone is not willing to take some amount of responsibility over time for their behavior. That doesn't mean that they have to do exactly what you want them to. But ideally, like if this is very hurtful to you and someone is saying, hey, I'm not going to do anything about this, I have no intention of doing anything about this, then you have to make a choice, which is, am I willing to stay in this relationship if my partner is unwilling to do anything about this? And even then, the answer may be yes. That's not a decision for the internet or us to say, oh, you should leave them. That's a decision for you to make, right? You have to decide, because any relationship involves compromise. What are you willing to compromise for the sake of this relationship? Because everyone's going to give up something. So is crying yourself to sleep in broken armchairs worth it for all of the positives in the relationship? Because we have no idea what the positives are, right? Like they're not talked about in this, right? Maybe the person is really awesome at other times. Maybe this person, they are very encouraging in terms of the poster writing novels and things like that. This is the other problem with the internet, is like we tend to get one side of things, right? No discussion is ever complete. There's never the perspective of other things. Someone's posting about a problem, but that could be 5% of the relationship, could be 10% of the relationship. So I'd say that when someone, doesn't take your concerns seriously, when they're not willing to try to engage with you and try to address your concerns, it's not that they fail, it's the lack of effort that I think is the most concerning. So if something really, really bothers you and someone is not willing to do anything about it, that's when I think you should seriously consider leaving. And that's also where, you may not be able to vocalize those thoughts in a way that they are understanding. So I think couples counseling and stuff like that is like really good. So that's the reason that we do couples counseling when things are falling apart, because none of us are, if you're a therapist, you're a trained communicator. If you're a coach, we train people in communications. If you're a FBI hostage negotiator, you're trained in communications. If you're like a PR person, you're trained in communications. So we do have people who are formally trained to communicate, but most of us don't have formal communication training. And so even then, like, you got to give your partner a chance, because you may not be voicing things in a way that are actually like is very understandable or actionable. But I'd say the main thing to really consider is this person willing to put forth effort? Are they taking your concerns seriously? It doesn't mean doing what you ask them to do, because you may be asking unreasonable things. Shocking, right? Just because you're emotionally hurt doesn't mean that your requests are reasonable. Very shocking. So I would say if there's a lack of dialogue, if there's a lack of effort, if there's a lack of desire to engage and sort of make you happy, if there's a lack of effort in terms of going to therapy or going to couples counseling, if you ask for those things, right? If you say, hey, this is important to me, I want you to do this for the sake of our relationship, and they refuse, like, that's when I think you should seriously consider whether this relationship is right for you. Yeah. Your feelings are valid, right? But the requests based on your feelings may not be. Absolutely. Okay, should we talk about clingy? PogChan, thank you very much for referring Jeff Lord to the appropriate videos. Oh, this is really good. So Fujin R4 Ijin is asking, Fujin Raijin. Oh, got it. What do you do when you're in a position similar to the husband in the story? The difficulty managing anger, frustration with falling at games or other skilled hobbies, the shame of outbursts, the fear of never improving, feeling alone in your issues. So I'd say start by having a conversation with your partner, right? Say, hey, what do you think about my behaviors? You know, like can you help me? So in the same way, that we're asking the wife to recruit the husband's help, you as a husband should recruit your significant other for help. Say like, hey, I'm struggling with this. I don't like the way that I'm behaving, but I don't know what to do. I feel powerless. Like I try to control it and I lose control and I don't know what to do. Will you please help me? Can we talk about it? Right? And that's like, it's really powerful in a relationship to ask someone for help. It can be so hard to do, but just asking for help can be so powerful. And then there may be a point where, you know, you may need to seek couples counseling or therapy. I mean, this is this story is something that we hear a lot in coaching, right? So this is like a good example of like stuff that may be right on the edge of like coaching versus therapy, because therapy, remember, is really about, so coaching is inappropriate for any kind of medical or diagnosable illness. So if you have bipolar disorder, if you have schizophrenia or things like that, like that's something that you should absolutely see a therapist for. But in terms of developing a healthy relationship with technology, in terms of understanding, you know, and peer support can be really good for that, right? So we hear this a lot in terms of helping people improve their relationships, improve their relationship to technology. That's something that's fair for coaching. But I think generally speaking, if you're the husband, I would seriously consider something like couples counseling. If the two of you, so start by just talking to your partner, see how far you can get. Consider something like couples counseling. Consider something like seeing a coach. Okay. All right. So shall we talk about clinginess? A lot of good questions about ego and performance. That's why we have a whole thing about that. So y'all should check that out, the Atmanpada. I do think we also have, so there's a question by Yorsa, my ego self-worth is tied to my performance in whatever I'm pursuing. How do I begin to separate that and improve healthily? That's because it's ego, right? So you don't have a sense of self outside of your performance. So you have to start developing that. I think we've absolutely had questions about that in the past. Let's do clingy. Okay, this is a good one. I, 18M, have noticed a pattern in my relationships with women. We would get to know each other, we're texting for hours, we're making jokes, we're just having a lovely conversation. Then the next day we start texting again, but with a little less engagement. And as time goes on, the other person just completely stops responding, even though we had a lot in common. So I tried to flip the script. Instead of sending good morning texts, I would just text when I have something interesting to say. Instead of giving compliments, I would maybe tease in a playful way. Instead of caring about the other person, I literally didn't give a crap what happens to them. And for some reason, that worked. Every time I texted them, they would reply back pretty much straight away, and they would reciprocate the same energy I give. So what's the point of having a relationship if I can't be interested in the other person for them to be interested in me? It's a really common experience, right? So if you're someone who finds yourself, it's a really unfortunate conclusion or trajectory that this person is going through, which is I engage with someone, I get super excited, we have a wonderful time, and then over time, my relationship with them slowly extinguishes. And so what I have to force myself to start doing is like stop caring. It's like stop being like authentic, like I'm going to stop complimenting them. I have to train myself to not care about them. And then what happens when I train myself to not care about this person, I actually get like better responses, right? The response that I get is more of what I want. They respond more to my texts. And so what's happening is this person is sort of like struggling between what they kind of consider like being like an authentic good person, which hurts me and doesn't get me what I want, versus kind of being sort of an asshole and being less kind, which sort of gets me what I want, right? And then this person kind of struggles, and then they're like stuck between one of two places. Do I become clingy or do I become an asshole? And it's really unfortunate when people find themselves in this situation because they like tend to wind up doing one of the two, and both of them are actually toxic, right? We don't want to become clingy, but we also don't want to like, start not caring about the people that we want to form relationships with. Like that's not healthy over time, but it happens all the time. Very, very classic. So what's going on here and what do we do about it? So the key thing to start with, as always, like so at HG, we talk about a principle that I learned in medicine, which is that good diagnosis precedes good treatment. So what we want to do is start by understanding the problem, right? And that's not exclusive to medicine. If I have flooding in my house and a plumber comes over, they have to start by understanding, okay, where's the leak coming from, right? If you go to a mechanic, they have to diagnose the problem before they fix it. So in that same way, within yourself, you have to understand what's going on before you can start to correct that behavior and ultimately like go to a kind of healthy place. So little bits of advice. The first thing that I've noticed about people who get really, really clingy, I wasn't going to do iPad for this, but maybe I should, is that the first thing they should kind of scale back on is like the intensity of the first interaction. So there's a saying that, the brightest flame burns out the quickest, right? And so in any kind of relationship, like I've just noticed this a lot. I mean, I've noticed it kind of clinically. So this is like a well-described experience of people with like borderline personality disorder, where they tend to have very, very intense, like rocket fuel level relationships that then run out of fuel and then collapse. So I'm not saying that everyone in this situation has borderline personality disorder, but it's just something that we've seen a lot, or I've worked with a lot. So how to avoid getting clingy? Let's start there. And then what we need to do is first of all recognize that like this person has two options. Either they go the clingy route or they go the uncaring route. And what they find is that this leads to extinguishing interactions. And this leads to increasing interactions. And what this person wants is increased interactions because they're looking for friendship or romantic relationships, right? And so what they sort of end up doing is learning that, maybe I go down this route. So the first thing that we want to understand is what's going on inside, right? Like, how do you feel when you're texting for hours the first day you meet someone? That sounds a little bit excessive to me. So it sounds to me like a bright candle that's going to burn out quickly. And this is just something to understand in relationships, right? Is generally speaking, like healthy relationships tend to form slowly. So if you think about the interaction for people, with healthy relationships, it tends to go like this. So this is time, and this is level of interaction. Right? If we look at like the formation of unhealthy relationships, oftentimes it can be like this. right? This is time, level of interaction. And so sometimes you can absolutely have this kind of relationship, right? Where it's like intense and it just, it builds and it stays high. But I would say that generally speaking, these two curves, this one and this one, are way more common. So the main thing to really understand is, what are you trying to get out of this relationship? Because I think oftentimes what happens is, if you're like complimenting a girl, like, are you like, that's kind of interesting, right? Are you like, what are you doing there? So generally speaking, I don't really compliment people that I have relationships with. I may appreciate them from time to time, but I don't like open up with a bunch of compliments. Because usually like that signals something else. Are you like, so you have to start by figuring out what is going on within you. So when you're texting someone for hours, like, why are you texting them for hours? Are you genuinely enjoying the interaction? Are you hopeful that this will turn into something? Are you just are you just kind of chilling and having a good time? Because if you're chilling and having a good time, then it shouldn't really matter to you that things kind of fizzle out over time, right? Like, it shouldn't matter, because you're just appreciating the moment, and the moment isn't going to last forever. So if I'm like walking down the street and I see a beautiful flower and I smell the flower and I'm like, wow, that flower is amazing, and then I just move on with my life. So if this is truly what you're doing, then it shouldn't bother you that the next day they don't text, right? Because you can just appreciate the interaction and move on. But chances are you're hopeful, or you're attaching some kind of expectation. And this is the key thing to understand. Because when you attach an expectation, oftentimes done subconsciously, like you're kind of lonely, you're kind of interested in this person, you do want to ask them out, and you start complimenting them, and like you're kind of like gearing up to ask them out, you want them to like you, you're kind of like love bombing them a little bit, right? You're trying to stack the deck in your favor. You're creating an expectation. And if you're not transparent with that expectation, if you're not transparent with that intention, what it's probably going to lead to is like some kind of miscommunication over time, because you're saying one, like you're doing one thing, you're intending one thing, but you're kind of saying something else. You're not being kind of explicit over it. And then like the person doesn't understand what's going on in your head, right? Like, because you're not telling them. In fact, what you're sort of doing is like even misleading them in a worst case scenario. And then what happens is they don't respond the way that you want to. So like, this sounds like egregious to me. Sending a good morning text? Dude, I have never sent a good morning text to anyone that I don't have some kind of serious relationship with. Like, even close friends of mine, like, I don't send them good morning texts. Like, the only people that I will send good morning texts to are people that I have intimate relationships with. So this sounds very strange to me. So I don't know if this is the kind of thing where Dr. K is a boomer and like this is normal now, but like, I don't send good morning texts to my friends. Like, I sent like good morning text to my girlfriend. Like, I sent good morning text to my wife. I may imagine at some point that I will send good morning texts to, maybe my parents or brother or like, kids one day. I'm sure I would want a good morning text from my kids when they're old enough to text. But this sounds to me to be like quite intimate. And so this is where I don't know what the standard is. Maybe that's normal now, but like, this could be the kind of thing where like, you have one really, really like intensive, long, lovely conversation, and then you start sending good morning texts, and the person is like, wait, this is a level of intimacy that I'm not comfortable with. Like yesterday we were talking about how awesome Dune is and how much we love the revival of science fiction and fantasy. And the next morning you're like, good morning, beautiful. Like, that seems kind of like romantic in nature to me. And this is where I'd sort of say, like, be explicit if you have an intention. So what kind of expectation should have? Like, if you're romantically interested, just ask him out. Right? Just do it. Like, if you want to ask someone out, just ask them out. Don't piddle around. And if you're afraid of rejection, which is oftentimes the reason that people don't ask people out, right? Like, you're afraid they're going to say no. So let me compliment them a lot. Let me tell them how awesome I am. Let me convince them that I'm worth going out with. And then I will ask them out. And during that time, you're like doing all these weird things, like you're sending flowers and crap like that. And it's like, why is this person saying, oh, you're so sweet? But you're not asking him out. So then you kind of get friend zoned. because you're not like making your intentions clear. And then you ask them out, and then like you've had this expectation, and then that expectation gets dashed, right? So I think if you want to ask someone out, just ask them out. Next thing is about the clinginess. So what are you getting? Like, what's going on? So this is where I would really think a little bit about when you have this awesome kind of this relationship here, what emotional needs are being met? Because when we think about clinginess, this comes down in essence to emotional needs. Okay? So when I'm clingy with someone, like they're giving me something. Like why, like let's even think about the word cling. So, you know, a couple years ago when we first put our kids into like daycare or whatever, like they cling to us, right? Children will like cling to their parents when they feel like unable to be on their own. They don't feel safe. You know, you cling to, like, even if you think about stray cats, like if you feed a cat and they start following you around, they're kind of clinging to you, right? You're meeting some kind of emotional need. Now, what tends to happen, the reason we get into clingy relationships is because people inadvertently meet a high, intense emotional need of ours. So this is where like you're texting this person, it's like, wow, like this is amazing. This is what I've been craving this entire time. And so for you, like let's look at the interaction, okay? So let's talk about intensity of interaction. And then here's you, right? So the intensity of interaction is really high. And then for them, like it may be like here. And then in this mismatch is like when you start to get clingy, because then when the next day rolls around, right? Like you're texting at this level, good morning, compliments, because you're trying to get them to do what they did yesterday. You want that again. You're like, oh my God, that felt so good. I felt so heard. I connected so much. I didn't feel alone. Like that was awesome. Give it to me again. And so you open out strong out of the gate. But then they kind of respond with this. And then what happens over time is that the more of a mismatch there is, the more the communication is going to decrease. Okay? Because if it's like a mismatch in communication, it's kind of think about, you know, like friends that you play games with online. Like y'all are kind of both on the same page. They're like some people that are like messaging you every day, hey, you want to play Dota? Hey, you want to play Dota? Hey, you want to play Dota? And if you don't play Dota that often, like that mismatch is going to lead them to start asking other people and you to like not respond to them every day. And over time, like the people that you end up interacting with are the people that are sort of like on your level. And so why is this person getting more response when he stops caring? Because stopping to care is the way, so this is where his emotional needs are. This is where the person he's engaging with are. And when he stops caring, he's like artificially and arguably toxically reducing his emotional need, right? So when I like numb myself by 50%, then we're kind of on the same page. And then like our communication actually increases over time because we're both like in the same place. And so this is the last thing that I'd say. First thing is to understand your emotional needs. And then the next thing is to like recognize like, okay, what are this person's emotional needs? Because if we look at this, what's absent from this entirely is any understanding of the other person's experience, right? It's just about what I think, what I need, what I'm expecting. There's a complete lack of understanding of, okay, what does this person want from the relationship? What is this person's experience of the relationship? I'm not saying this to be harmful or try to, you know, I recognize that makes it sound like this person is uncaring. This person's 18. Like, we don't get taught this stuff. Like, that's the problem, right? No one sits us down and says, by the way, this is how you form a healthy relationship. It's just like RNG, depending on what our parents are, what your home life is like, you know, whether people like teach you this stuff intrinsically or not. I don't blame this person. I think, in fact, it's awesome that this person posted this because this problem is so common, but no one ever like explains this to us. And so what we end up doing is discovering artificial toxic ways of not caring about people that actually match their level of like engagement, right? And then we start to like see better responses. And then what happens over time is what this person is thinking is the right way to engage with people is to start being unfeeling and uncaring towards them. And if we do that, we're going to become toxic over time, and that'll ruin our relationships. But that's going to be the only way that we learned how to fix it, because no one sort of, taught us what the right level of interaction is. So think a little bit about, what is the other person's experience? What are they looking for? You can even ask them. Like, you can have a, DTR, define the relationship conversation with friends. Like, I actually have those conversations with people that even I play games with. I'll ask like questions occasionally. I'll be like, hey, like, how often do you want to, like, are you interested in playing Dota or not interested? Like, a very good friend of mine. Like, we've been tight, dude. We were like roommates way back, and like, we're like awesome friends. And I really love playing Dota. We'll sometimes play some games together, but they don't seem to be interested in Dota. They like watching Dota. So we'll have a conversation about it. And I'll be like, hey, I messaged you a couple times about Dota. You seem like you're not interested. Is this the kind of thing like you want me to message you or like not message you or like what? And he's like, oh yeah, it's got a steep learning curve, so I'm not interested in investing that much time, but I love watching it and I love it. Like, I'm down to watch anytime. I just don't want to play. And it's like, cool, now I understand. So you can kind of define the relationship. You can, even with people that you kind of meet, relatively soon, you can sort of check in with them periodically. You can sort of like read between the lines some. Because like it sounds kind of aggressive to me to sort of like, ask someone, hey, do you want me to text you every day the day after you meet them? Do you want me to text you good morning every single day after we've met once? This is the kind of thing where you had a really great conversation. I think it's fine to acknowledge it the next day. Hey, I really enjoyed talking to you yesterday. You want to hang out sometime? If that's what you want, right? Understand your emotional needs and make them known. And then give other people the opportunity to meet you where you're at or not meet you where you're at. And over time, you may learn some adjustments. Like, don't ask them that the next day, right? Like, leave the ball in their court sometimes. Don't always like have the ball in your court. So like the next day, see if they want to message you. And if they don't message you by like, 4 p.m., you just shoot them a quick text, say, hey, I really enjoyed our conversation yesterday. It was awesome. Hope you're doing well. And then if they don't respond, like, this is where you got to like learn how often the ball is coming across the court. Because this is what happens with people who are clingy. You become a tennis ball machine. So normally when two human beings are playing tennis, I hit the ball over to your side, right? And then I wait for them to hit it back. And then I hit it back. This is how tennis works. Now, I'm not saying some people will have very, very ironclad rules. Like if I text them and they don't respond, I'm never texting them again. I don't think that's healthy either, because sometimes stuff happens. Maybe the day that you texted them, their father got diagnosed with COVID, right? It's like, there are all kinds of reasons. So I think it's okay to like give them a couple days and text them again, and give them a couple days and text them again. And then if they don't respond, you can even have a conversation like this, which is, so I'll give you all an example of like so sometimes I'll invite people to things, right? And they won't come, and you invite them 3 times and they don't come. Then I think it's appropriate to just ask them a question. Be like, hey, I've invited you a couple times. It seems like you haven't come. I was just curious, do you want me to continue inviting you or not? Like, I understand sometimes people are busy. Sometimes people are just like not that interested. Just help me understand. Do you want me to invite you in the future? Yes or no? That I don't think is aggressive. And if they don't respond to that, then you're done. Sometimes what happens with clingy people is it's a machine gun. It's a tennis ball machine. You're just sending text after text after text after text after text. Feels overwhelming. The person feels attacked, and then they shut down, right? They put up barriers, and then they end up blocking you if you're not careful. So to summarize, this kind of situation is very, very common. We'll oftentimes meet people and we'll hit it off. And we enjoy that interaction so much that like we start to get hungry for it. We attach certain expectations, certain hopes. Oh my God, this conversation was amazing. I want to have another one. I want to have another one. I want to have another one, which makes perfect sense, right? If you eat some really delicious food, you wake up the next day, you're like, man, let's go round 2. Like, let's go. Like when you start playing a video game, right? And you really enjoy it, you binge that game for 8 hours. You don't wake up the next day and not think about it at all. You're like, let's go. Let's play again. It's completely normal to have that reaction. And at the same time, this is a relationship where someone else may have a slightly different perspective. You don't really know. So you've got to be careful. You've got to think a little bit about their perspective. So if you find yourself getting clingy and they kind of shut you down because you're kind of over communicating, what can also happen is you can learn in kind of like a hurtful way to stop caring about the other person. And when you stop caring about the other person, what can happen is this scenario here, where you artificially reduce your level of communication to a level they're comfortable with. And you actually observe, rightly so, this is like kind of an observation, that they respond better to that. You're not actually being an ass to them, right? You're just like making yourself care less so that you bombard them less. And they're actually comfortable with that. So then they respond more. And if you're not careful, what that'll end up as is you becoming kind of like toxic over time with the way that you think about other people and the way that you treat other people. Because it does actually give you the kind of response that you want. And so what should you do about this? Start by understanding yourself, right? What needs of mine are being met? Like, what am I getting out of this? Why am I doing this? Why do I like this so much? And generally speaking, what you also want to do is think about the other person. Like, where are they in this relationship? Are they as into me as I'm into them? Like, you know, give them some space, give them some time, give them some, you know, time to kind of let you know what their needs are. If they are just as into you as you are into them, they'll probably text you back. Over time, generally speaking, I think it's important to scale up your interactions slowly with other human beings. That's how relationships form, right? It's like, you know, if you meet someone and you move in with them because y'all are deeply in love a week later, those relationships, in my general understanding, are less likely to succeed. The ones that succeed are the ones that you're dating for a year or two before you move in, right? There's like a natural progression. So acknowledge that and sort of take things a little bit slower. And as you understand what needs of yours are being met, that'll be easier. And the last thing that you can do is also just have a defining the relationship conversation, like when it's appropriate. Like, you know, a lot of people aren't going to be ready for that conversation 24 hours after meeting you. Like, what is this? Like, the person's like, I don't know. I just met you yesterday. I have no idea what this is. But at some point, it may be useful to have a little bit of a conversation like that. Like, hey, you know, I've invited you a couple times. It seems like you've been busy. I'm just curious. Do you want me to continue inviting you? You know, simple, yes or no. You don't have to provide justification. You don't have to provide reasoning. You don't have to explain your thinking. Just send a simple thing their way. Be a little bit patient. Be a little bit forgiving. Don't over-explain. Don't share all your anxieties with them, right? Ha, I have anxiety. Ha, ha, I'm afraid you're abandoning me. And it's like, then the person's gonna be like, this is too much for me to handle. Just ask them, hey, what do you want? Simple. Give them space. And hopefully, as you start to understand what your needs are, as you start to be a little bit more empathic towards them, your relationships will improve. Okay, so Scallon is saying, but even that question is super duper intrusive and loaded. I don't think you realize it. I don't know what question you're referring to, but it may be. You know, so this is the kind of thing where, like, I've shared with y'all, even over the course of the last 20 minutes, that I'm not an expert at, like, texting nowadays. So I don't know what's normal and what isn't. So if people have stuff to share, this is once again where Dr. K, like, knows a lot of things, but, you know, the most brilliant pieces of information that come out of this channel don't come from me. They come from y'all. The most brilliant insights come from posts like this, right? Like, this is like, this person sharing their experience of this is really where the real information comes from. This is where we illustrate exactly what's going on and what's really common for people. So if I'm saying something that y'all feel is too aggressive, then, you know, please correct me. It's tricky. So the last thing that I'll kind of say is that the nature of communication is changing on a level that I honestly believe is unprecedented in the history of humanity. So, like, for the history of humanity, we've primarily communicated verbally, right? And in person. Like, that's what most of human communication has been like. And so now with the advent of technology, sure, it started with things like phone calls and stuff, but now with, like, texting and FaceTime and, like, all kinds of other stuff, like, the nature of communication, the rules of communication, the rules of dating, the accessibility of people that you can date, all of that is changing at an unprecedented speed. So I don't know what the rules are anymore. I don't know that anyone knows what the rules are anymore. And half of the reason I see this all the time, like on different kinds of Tinder subreddits and stuff, where like people are operating on different sets of rules. And people, I saw this post the other day where someone was like, hey, where do you feel like going for our first date? And then like the response was like, if you haven't picked a place out, I don't know why you're asking me. Like, you're supposed to pick the place. And the person was like, well, I didn't want to try to force you to come somewhere because some people feel unsafe when I suggest something. Like, so I always try to be courteous and like let someone pick something that they feel safe coming to. And the person's like, no, like as the dude, you're supposed to pick. That's what the man does. Like, I'm not interested in someone who's like not aggressive. And it's like, we don't know what the rules are anymore because half of y'all are operating on one set of rules. Half of y'all are operating on the other set of rules. It's not even half and half. It's not two sets of rules. It's like thousands of sets of rules that no one is clearly defining. And then we like we blame people for not understanding the rule set that we have in our head, where it's like, where did that become the official rule set? So I don't know how to fix this, but I think the best place to start is to try to communicate with each other a little bit more. And over time, hopefully you'll find people who can communicate with you and are interested in defining what the nature of y'all's relationship is. And then like, we'll kind of figure this stuff out. Like, cause I think that's the only way to do it. So good luck and my condolences. It sounds rough out there, chat. We're going to do what we can to help you. Right? And especially, I guess it's February, so it's kind of Valentine's Day is coming up. So maybe we'll dig into this a little bit more. But this, unfortunately, I hate to tell y'all that, as a training as a psychiatrist and studying for a few years in India does not make me an expert in this topic. So this is where I'm going to lean on y'all heavily. This is one of those things that y'all got to tell us what it's like. We got to figure this out together, but I can't do it. 12 rules for dating? I'd love to do it, but I'm not an expert in that. Do we need that? Absolutely. All right. So meditation to lower clinginess. Not exactly. So I had a pre-planned meditation for today, so we're going to do that one. It may help with clinginess. So I'm going to teach y'all another meditation on the Manipura chakra, right? So a reminder that a lot of the meditation so there's evidence that meditation is scientifically helpful for all kinds of things. But a lot of what we teach on stream is not actually like scientifically validated. So especially as we start to get to some of the more spiritual techniques, we don't have any scientific data that this stuff works, beyond the fact that some kind of meditation works. So we do know kind of scientifically is that there are some differences in meditation techniques, but that generally speaking, studies will look at slightly different techniques and they all tend to have a common kind of effect. So I'm going to teach y'all something about the Manipura chakra today. So the Manipura chakra is the chakra that governs sort of digestion and kind of like metabolizing things. So personally, I have found these techniques effective for people who are looking to process emotions. It doesn't mean that it works for all of them. I haven't done any scientific studies on it or things like that. But as a clinician, you learn some things through your clinical experience. And what I found is that people who are struggling with addictions, for example, certain techniques seem to work better for them. People who are trying to understand themselves better, there are techniques that work similar to them. People who compare themselves a lot, there are techniques that work for them. And for people who are trying to let go of emotions and digest emotions, these techniques seem to work better for them, based on my anecdotal experience. So this technique, once again, is a Manipura chakra technique. And so what I'm going to ask y'all to do is this technique is ideally done. It's beautiful if you can do it outside in the sunlight. And it's going to be relatively simple. So what we're going to do is we're going to sit up straight, and then I'm going to ask you to inhale. And as you inhale, I want you to feel that warmth coming in to your belly. And we're going to do an abdominal breath. And then as we have that abdominal breath and we start to exhale, we're going to feel the coolness leave. But I want you to focus on that feeling of warmth in the center of your belly, even as you exhale. And what you'll almost discover for some people, they'll sort of feel like the warmth actually increases as they exhale. So we're going to inhale, we're going to hold it for a little while, and exhale, and our attention is going to be on that feeling of warmth in our belly. And we'll do about 9 breaths, okay? So the sequence is going to be inhale, hold for maybe 7, 9 seconds, exhale, and then our attention will be on the feeling of warmth in our belly. And we'll do about 9 rounds. For those of y'all that are in the EU or in climates where there isn't much sunlight, I apologize, this may be hard to do outdoors, but if you are in a place where you can do it outdoors, that can feel really, really good, okay? So let's start by just closing our eyes, sitting up straight, kind of calibrating our breath. And now we'll begin the practice. So I want you to sit up straight and inhale. Feel the heat in your belly. Hold it. And then exhale. Feel the heat in your belly. It's 1 round of the practice. Now we'll inhale. Feel that heat. Hold it. And then exhale. That completes the 2nd round, and just focus on that sensation of warmth, even between breaths. Now we'll breathe in again. Hold it. And exhale. And now continue at your own pace. We'll target about 6 breaths, but I'll walk you through a couple of the sensations. So continue at your own pace. And kind of notice that as you inhale, you may feel coolness. But as soon as the breath stops, notice the way that the heat suffuses your stomach. Kind of pushes that coldness out. That warmth radiates almost from your spine to the front of your stomach. And as you exhale, focus on that warmth. So we'll practice for a few more breaths, maybe about 60 seconds. Now we'll do our final breath. As you do your final exhalation, put your palms together in front of you. Rub them together to create heat friction. Cup them over your eyes. One final breath in, and as you exhale, slowly open your eyes. Let your hands come down. So I'd recommend that you all do this practice for about 5 to 10 minutes at a time. You can work your way up to 15 to 20 if you want to. Remember not to strain yourself. So you don't want to get lightheaded with the level of breathing you're doing. So you can always take a break. And then you can always incorporate this practice into other Manipura chakra practices, other pranayama practices, other meditation practices. So remember that when you're developing a practice, you may want some kind of centering or grounding techniques first, like Nadi Shuddhi or alternate nostril breathing. And then you want to move into your really focused, goal-oriented practices, like chakra practices. And then you can sometimes have a closing practice if you want to, or a more intense spiritual practice like mantra or sankalpa towards the end. Yeah. So for those of you that are saying lots of body tingles, feels great, that was needed, good. I'm really, really happy that the practice was good for you. Remember that, my experience as a meditation teacher has taught me that there isn't one way to meditate, and that what my teachers explained to me, I one day asked them the question, why are there so many different techniques? And they said, because there are lots of different people. And so different techniques are going to be suited for different kinds of people, in the same way that some people like some food and other people like other food. So figure out, what is the nature of your mind? What is the natural inclination of your mind? And my experience as a meditation teacher has been that meditation is not hard. It's just you have to find the right kind of technique for your mind. Who are we rating, chat? Okay, we're gonna rate Gork. Pooper Noodle? On a chess? Let's see. Chess? Gork? Gorp? Okay, we can rate Gorp. So one last thing is we may be working on something, a super secret project, Wednesday and Friday. Stay tuned to our socials. So we may not be streaming Wednesday and Friday because we've got something in the works, but y'all will see hopefully we'll see on Monday. But we'll keep y'all posted, okay? It's a little bit up in the air. Take care, and I hope y'all have a good week.